For 20 years, he'd been quietly waiting, watching every new tenant, as if they might hold the answer. Nobody knew why he was so careful about who lived in the building, until artificial intelligence revealed he was still investigating the unsolved case that had ended his career, and he was closer to the truth than anyone realized. Welcome to AI Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of persistence, justice delayed, and how technology helped solve a mystery that had haunted one man for 3 decades, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe some cases are never truly cold, hit that subscribe button. The Riverside Apartments in Portland, Oregon looked like every other mid-rise building in the city. 60 units, a small courtyard, the kind of place where young professionals and retirees lived side by side without much interaction. Managing the building was Frank Morrison, 63 years old, meticulous about maintenance, careful about tenant selection. He'd been living in the building's ground floor manager's apartment for 20 years, and in that time he'd developed a reputation for being thorough, some said obsessively so. Frank runs background checks like he's hiring CIA agents, tenants would joke. Takes forever to get approved to live here. What residents didn't know was that Frank wasn't just checking credit scores and employment history. He was looking for something specific, patterns that most landlords would never notice. Frank had an unusual habit of memorizing tenant details, their routines, their visitors, where they'd lived before, what kind of cars they drove. He'd chat casually with residents in the lobby, asking questions that seemed friendly, but were actually carefully constructed inquiries. "How long were you in Seattle before moving here?" he'd ask. "Ever spend time in the Bay Area? Got family around these parts?" Most people assumed Frank was just making conversation, being a friendly building manager. They didn't realize he was conducting interviews, cross-referencing information, building profiles. The few times someone noticed his unusual attention to detail, Frank would deflect. 20 years in property management, you learn to pay attention, helps keep the building safe and the community strong. But there were other signs that Frank's vigilance went beyond typical landlord caution. His apartment was filled with filing cabinets containing detailed records that had nothing to do with building maintenance. Late at night, residents walking past his window would see him at a desk covered with papers, photographs and maps marked with colored pins. Detective Rachel Torres from Portland PD had been called to the Riverside Apartments for what seemed like a routine noise complaint. While there, she noticed something unusual about the building manager. Frank moved through the building with the situational awareness of law enforcement. He positioned himself to have clear sight lines, unconsciously assessed everyone he encountered, and demonstrated knowledge of investigative procedures that seemed far beyond typical property management training. "Frank, you handle tenant issues like you're conducting witness interviews," Rachel observed after watching him de-escalate a dispute between neighbors. "Picked up communication skills over the years," Frank said. "Lot of conflict resolution in this job," but Rachel wasn't convinced. Frank's approach was too professional, too trained. He asked questions in a specific sequence designed to elicit information, used silence strategically to encourage people to keep talking, and demonstrated micro-expression reading that suggested formal training. The breakthrough came when Rachel ran a routine check on the building for an unrelated investigation and discovered that Frank had been requesting public records, old newspaper archives, and accessing databases that most civilians wouldn't know existed. "Frank Morrison," Rachel said during their next encounter. "That name sounds familiar." Frank's expression shifted slightly, the first time Rachel had seen him show anything but calm professionalism. "Used to be a lot of Frank Morrisons in Portland," he said carefully, "but only one who was a detective with major crimes." Rachel continued, "Only one who worked the Jennifer Caldwell murder case 30 years ago." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "That was a long time ago. The case that was never solved. The one that ended your career when you became obsessed with finding the killer. I prefer to think of it as dedicated rather than obsessed," Frank said, "and I didn't end my career. I just changed my approach." Portland State University's Criminal Justice Department had developed an AI system for analyzing cold case files. The program could cross-reference witness statements, identify pattern inconsistencies, and spot connections that human investigators might have missed over decades. Detective Torres had access to the system and, intrigued by Frank's story, decided to run the Jennifer Caldwell case through the AI analysis. The 1994 murder had been brutal and puzzling. Jennifer Caldwell, a 28-year-old graphic designer, had been found in her apartment, the very building that Frank now managed. The case had multiple suspects but insufficient evidence to prosecute anyone. Eventually, it went cold, and Frank Morrison's obsessive pursuit of leads had cost him his badge. The AI processed 30 years of case files, witness statements, forensic reports, and follow-up investigations. What it found was extraordinary. The system identified a pattern that human investigators had missed. Several key witnesses had given statements that were internally consistent, but collectively impossible. The timeline they'd described couldn't work unless at least one person was lying about their location. More significantly, the AI cross-referenced the witness descriptions with modern facial aging algorithms and ran them against current Portland residents. One name came up: Thomas Garrett, a tenant who'd been living in Riverside Apartments for the past 18 months. According to the AI analysis, Garrett's current appearance matched age progression data for a person of interest who'd been questioned in 1994 but never charged. The same Thomas Garrett who Frank Morrison had been watching closely since the day he moved in. Rachel approached Frank carefully. If the AI was correct, Frank had been living in the same building as a murder suspect for over a year without anyone knowing his true purpose. "Frank, I need to show you something," she said, arriving at his apartment with her laptop and the AI analysis results. She showed him everything: the timeline inconsistencies, the witness statement contradictions, the facial aging match for Thomas Garrett. Frank looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. "I knew," he said finally. "Not with certainty, not with proof, but I knew." "How long have you suspected Garrett?" "Since 3 months before he moved in. He contacted the building about availability under a different name first. When I saw the inquiry, something about the way he described his background, it matched patterns from the original investigation." Rachel stared at him. "You've been conducting surveillance for over a year and a half." "I've been waiting," Frank corrected, "watching, hoping he'd make a mistake, or that new evidence would surface. The Jennifer Caldwell case destroyed my career because I couldn't let it go. I wasn't going to make that mistake again by moving without solid proof." Frank opened one of his filing cabinets, revealing decades of meticulous documentation, updated witness interviews, property records, surveillance logs, pattern analyses that would have impressed any cold case unit. "I've been living in this building for 20 years because this is where Jennifer died. I manage it because it's the only way I could stay connected to the case without violating any legal boundaries." Rachel understood. "You've been conducting an unofficial investigation for 3 decades. I've been waiting for justice," Frank said. "And now AI has done what I couldn't, provided objective proof that my instincts were right." With the AI analysis as foundation, Rachel reopened the Jennifer Caldwell case officially. Frank's decades of documentation, combined with the AI's timeline reconstruction, painted a picture that had been invisible 30 years ago. Thomas Garrett, who'd been known as Thomas Greenberg in 1994, had been Jennifer's upstairs neighbor. He'd given a statement placing himself across town during the time of the murder, but the AI revealed that his alibi witness had contradicted herself in ways that were nearly impossible to detect without computer analysis. The original investigators missed it because the contradictions were subtle, Rachel explained to her captain. One witness said she saw Greenberg at a coffee shop at 2 p.m. Another confirmed he was at the same coffee shop but described weather conditions that didn't exist that day. A third placed his car in a location where traffic cameras, which we've now reviewed, show it couldn't have been. The AI had done something else remarkable. It had identified a pattern in Greenberg-Garrett behavior over 30 years, 5 different cities, each time moving after building relationships with young women who resembled Jennifer Caldwell. 2 of those women had filed restraining orders. One had disappeared, though her case remained unsolved. "Frank, your instincts were right all along," Rachel told him. "Garrett is a serial predator. Jennifer Caldwell wasn't his only victim. But proving a 30-year-old murder required more than AI analysis and pattern recognition. It required physical evidence, and that's where Frank's patience paid off. For 18 months, Frank had been managing the building where Garrett lived, maintaining public areas, handling repairs, all while documenting everything. He'd kept security camera footage, logged visitor patterns, and preserved building records that would prove critical to establishing Garrett's connection to the original crime scene. The arrest came quietly. No dramatic raid, no confrontation, just a knock on Garrett's door and a warrant based on new evidence and AI analysis that had reopened the case. Garrett looked at Frank when the police arrived. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and Frank saw recognition and fear. "You," Garrett said. "You've been watching me." "I've been waiting," Frank replied. 30 years. As officers led Garrett away, Rachel turned to Frank. "We'll need your documentation for the trial. Everything you've collected over 2 decades. It's all organized and ready," Frank said. "I've been prepared for this day since 1994. Frank's documentation provided context and pattern evidence. Most damning of all was forensic evidence that Frank had carefully preserved, building maintenance records showing that Garrett had accessed areas of the original crime scene that he'd claimed never to have entered. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with a guilty verdict, Frank was sitting in the back of the courtroom, exactly where he'd been sitting for every day of testimony. Jennifer Caldwell's sister, who'd been a teenager when her sister was killed, found Frank after the verdict. "Thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for not forgetting her." "I couldn't forget," Frank said quietly. "She deserved justice. She deserved to be remembered." After Garrett's conviction, Portland PD offered to reinstate Frank's detective status, acknowledging that his instincts and persistence had solved a case that had stumped the department for 3 decades. Frank declined. "I'm not a detective anymore," he told Rachel. "Haven't been for a long time. I'm a building manager who happened to be in the right place to help solve an old case." But Frank's contribution went beyond solving Jennifer Caldwell's murder. His documentation methods and the AI analysis that validated them became the template for how Portland PD approached cold cases. Frank proved something important, Rachel noted in her report. Cold cases don't need flashy detective work. They need patience, careful documentation, and modern technology applied to old evidence. The AI system that cracked the case was expanded to analyze other unsolved homicides. Frank's methodology, living close to the crime scene, monitoring patterns, maintaining meticulous records, was studied by law enforcement agencies as an example of how civilian persistence could support professional investigations. But the work that mattered most to Frank was personal. He'd spent 30 years waiting for justice, and now he could finally move forward. Frank didn't leave Riverside Apartments after Garrett's conviction. Instead, he transformed the building into something more than a crime scene. He made it a memorial to persistence and justice. He established a small scholarship in Jennifer Caldwell's name for young artists pursuing graphic design. He worked with victim advocacy groups to create resources for families dealing with unsolved cases, and he continued managing the building, but with a different purpose now. "This place represents something important," Frank explained to new tenants. "It's where someone's life was stolen, yes, but it's also where justice was patient enough to wait 30 years. That's worth remembering." The AI system that helped solve Jennifer's case has been implemented by law enforcement agencies nationwide, analyzing cold cases and identifying patterns that human investigators might miss. Frank has become an informal consultant for families dealing with unsolved homicides. He doesn't investigate cases himself, but he teaches patience, documentation methods, and the importance of never giving up hope that justice might still be possible. Most people think cold cases are hopeless, Frank tells these families, but cold just means waiting, and sometimes waiting is the most important work you can do. The detective who became a building manager represents something important about justice, patience, and the responsibility to remember. Frank's story shows us that artificial intelligence isn't just about solving technical problems. Sometimes it's about validating human instincts, providing the objective analysis that turns decades of persistence into actionable evidence, and sometimes justice isn't about dramatic breakthroughs or clever detective work. It's about refusing to let victims be forgotten, about waiting as long as necessary, and about understanding that some debts can never be abandoned, no matter how long it takes to pay them. Because the real work of justice isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's just showing up every day, paying attention, and refusing to let time erase accountability. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever known someone who refused to give up on finding truth or seeking justice, even when everyone else had moved on? Someone whose persistence finally paid off? Share their stories in the comments below. Tell us about the patient investigators, the persistent family members, the people who wait decades for answers because some questions are too important to abandon. And if this story moved you, subscribe to AI Human Stories, because in a world where artificial intelligence can help solve mysteries that haunted us for generations, the most important discoveries aren't about technology, they're about recognizing that justice delayed doesn't always mean justice denied. that patience is sometimes the most powerful investigative tool, and that some people dedicate their entire lives to ensuring that victims are never forgotten. Until next time, remember, some cases are never truly cold, they're just waiting for the right combination of persistence and technology to finally bring them home.